On behalf of Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, I welcome you all to this new episode in the series India at 75 that we are celebrating. As you all must be aware, this is the 75th year of independence for this country. And, all of us have been thinking about there are a lot of conventional narratives that we talk about all the time, some really, important political leaders and things like that. But our country is not only made up of that, and our nation is not built only with that. There are so many contributions that are needed to create a culture, to create a country, to create an identity. And in this series, we are trying to celebrate people who have contributed uh, into creating of this culture together. So there are multiple sections of this, and all through the week we have different programs, and we have programs on theater and literary geniuses and scientists. And in a similar vein, we have been having this series about the people who have contributed a lot to arts and crafts. The first episode was on Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay. The second one was on Dashrath Patelji, in which Lalita Datta came and she spoke very, very beautifully. And we are very, very, very proud to present the third episode of this because we have Laila Tyabji herself, who's going to be here and interact with us. And interviewing her would be Miss Poonam Muttreja. I'll give you a little introduction to both of them, although both of them don't need any introduction. But for the uninitiated, as they say, so Padmashri Laila Tyabji is a craft designer. She's a writer. She's also a chairperson of Dastakar, the craft NGO she had found. She's been working with grassroots artisans all over India for over 4 decades now. Many of her most rewarding projects involve creating new livelihood avenues through craft for pastoral and marginalized rural communities, bonded labor in Bihar, displaced villages in Ranthambore, tribals in Odisha, victims of insurgency in Kashmir. She studied art in Baroda and Japan and under Toshi Yoshida, no less. And she has also worked as a freelance designer in textiles, graphics, interiors, and the theater. She enjoys using craft traditions and techniques in unexpected ways and contexts. She was awarded Padma Shri in 2012 for her work in the craft sector, and she's also the first Asian to receive the Aid to Artisan Preservation of Craft Award in New York in 2003. Interviewing her is Ms. Poonam Muttreja. She's the executive director of the Population Foundation of India, a non-profit organization that focuses on shifting the current thinking and programs on family planning to empowering people, especially women and adolescents, to take decisions regarding their health, sexuality, and well-being. She has more than 35 years of experience in the social development sector. Before joining PFI, she was India Country Director at MacArthur Foundation. She has also co-founded organizations in the areas of social justice like Shruti and Craft, that's Car, and programs on leadership like in Ashoka Foundation India. She has an MPA from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government and has been visiting faculty at New Hampshire College in Amherst and Earlham College in Richmond, Indiana. So with these two really wonderful people to interact, I think I should hand over the mic to them now and be the happy listener that I've always wanted to be.
Thank you.
So this is an absolutely exciting privilege to be talking to Laila, listening to Laila. Why do I say that? First of all, this program that the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation has is called Dialogues at 75. It's about celebrating India at 75 and India at 75, and so is Laila at 75. So it's really, Laila's not just an iconic person, but she, even at a place like this where she's speaking on India at 75, she brings herself in the gorgeous sari at 75. I am also very emotional and nostalgic as I do this, and there's nothing that has given me more excitement than having an opportunity to be speaking to Laila here. Laila, I'm sure 41 years of Dastakar and all of our collective participation when Dastakar started. Can I start there, though I'm going to go back to history, and I'm going to go back to when we are talking about India at 75, we can't just only talk about one Tyabji, Laila Tyabji. We have to talk about Laila Tyabji in the context of Badruddin Tyabji and the great-grandfather Badruddin Tyabji, and how the contribution of your family has partly shaped your thinking, but also how it can shape the thinking of young people going forward. So that, Laila, is the big agenda we have for you today. And I want to start by talking about your contribution to the arts and crafts. And I want to start by asking you to share with us what got you into the craft arena in such a big way that you are somebody who has led the sector in the last, I would not say 41 years, more than 41 years, because your association with crafts did not start at 41. And so if you start about, tell us about your trajectory and how you moved from, designing some very esoteric products, working with Khazana, when I say esoteric, working with Khazana, and so on, to working with the poorest artisans in this country.
Well, people obviously do want an exciting, inspiring answer. And I'm sorry to have to disappoint you, because really my life is a series of fortuitous accidents. And I've always taken each day as it comes. And somehow each day has led to something exciting and wonderful. So yes, I never set out to, work in the crafts field or set up a crafts organization. In fact, I think all 6 of us never really had that dream then. It was just something that we felt we wanted to do, and it sort of grew and grew. But really, as far as my life went, I suppose it started when I came back after studying art in Japan with grandiose ideas of being an artist with a capital A, but also an idea which seems very natural to me at the time, but looking back, perhaps it was unusual for a young woman in her early 20s in 1965, of living on my own, being independent, earning my own living. And I hasten to assure you that not because my parents threw me out of the house, but because I just felt that having been educated, I now had to prove myself. So I took this little Barsati in Defense Colony, and I started living there. And obviously I had to earn my rent and my bread and butter. And although I was practicing art, I had done hanga, woodblock prints in Japan, and I was doing those. I also started doing small design assignments. And in the 60s, design in India wasn't either as professionalized or as specialized as it is now. So I really had a very wonderful time, because I was doing clothes, I was doing graphics, I was doing work for the theater. I did Mrs. Gandhi's stationery. I, was involved in the Akbar Hotel and Asia 72, all kinds of projects. And I discovered that I really liked working with people, and I like to work with natural materials and traditional skills. And luckily, I had grown up in a family which, growing up, our home was always surrounded with Indian textiles and Indian crafts. So that appealed to me. And frankly, though I did do some, doing an office with stainless steel and plexiglass furniture didn't really appeal to me. I wanted to work with bidhi and with sort of wood carving and with chicks and daris and things like that. But it still was very much a kind of working with these materials, working with traditional skills, but more engaged in developing the product, the object. Craftspeople were my friends, they were my colleagues, but I really wasn't, that was not the object of the exercise until I was suddenly invited to go to Kutch as a visiting designer by two wonderful people, Minalini Sarabhai, who was the chairperson of the Gujarat State Handicrafts Corporation, which had just been set up, and Mr. Brij Bhasin, who became my mentor and my godfather and everything, and actually taught me everything I know about working with craftspeople as opposed to working with crafts traditions. So I went to Kutch, at that time a fairly unknown place, which had not entered the consciousness of most urban Indians. And in fact, when I was setting up to go there, people in Delhi asked me, is Kutch in Africa? Which just shows what a long way we've gone in these 41 years. I mean, actually 45 years since I went there. Because now, of course, Kutch everyone thinks of as the hub of Indian craftsmanship. So I landed up there, and I was there for 3 months, and then it got extended to 6 months. And it was just the most extraordinary experience. And for me, it was a real eye-opener, because I had gone there thinking that I was being so professional, and I had taken, my little kit. My mother made me a wonderful sort of kit with pens and pencils and paints and set squares and rulers and graph paper. And I realized, sitting in Kutchi homes with craftspeople, that this was really not the way that one worked with craftspeople, because at that time, again, reminding you that this was 45 years ago, craftspeople were just not used to this. And even if you showed them a photograph of themselves, they were so unaccustomed to seeing, to understanding scale, that when they saw a little, 4x5 image, they couldn't realize that that was them, because they were used to seeing things in real time and real size. And so if you wanted to make something, you really had to sit down on the floor and just make it with them. And luckily, I'm quite hands-on, and I always liked to sew and cook and do things with my hands. And so we did that, and that was how the first samples developed. But I also realized that if you're working with craftspeople who, however skilled they may be, are extraordinarily poor, and who that you have to do something about their lives as well. You can't just waft in and say, oh, this is what you should make, or you should use better material that doesn't run. Why don't you use silk or tussar? Or, they don't have the means to do that. Or that, and I think this relates to our first meeting, that however wonderful the craftsmanship on a piece of leather may be, if that leather is not properly cured and it smells or cracks or gets pupundi, then it's just not marketable. And the object of the exercise has to be, in the end, that the object is marketable. So for me, Kutch was a wonderful learning experience. It was also the beginning of friendships with crafts families who I'm still in touch with, now into the 3rd generation. And in fact, my sari today is made by Ismail Bhai, whose father was one of my gurus when I was in Kutch, Mohammad Bhai, and his sons and his grandchildren are now all still practicing the craft. And I think it's very exciting that even in the 21st century, craft is still viable for them. And to some extent, maybe by helping them, bringing them to the market, that is something that we have been able to do.
Which was the objective of Dastakar,
Yes.
bringing artisans back into the market.
Yeah.
And you have stayed the course and
back into the market, and as skilled professionals, not as marginalized people selling things as charity or subsidy.
Yeah, so Laila, in fact, when you talk about, and after after the Kutch experience, Dastakar started then. And, you know, I have to tell you a quick story about a very dear common friend of ours. I was saying to her that, you know, Laila Tyabji is going to be the world's leading first woman designer. It was, whether it was India, globally, it was dominated by men. Okay, and she is going to, you know, lead the design world. And you know what she said to me? Yes, I agree with your assessment of Laila, but if she hangs out with you and if you continue to do what you're thinking and what, you know, bringing artisans and doing bazaars, as you know, I did a few bazaars with Thilonia and so on before, her career will be destroyed and she'll become a jolewala. I am so proud to share with everybody that the craft, the most beautiful jhola, embroidered mostly by Laila herself, have been what the jholas that Laila wears, uses. And number two, I mean, what you could and you are, what do you mean could? You are, for me and many people, the designer the world needed. You have worked with the most, as I said, unskilled in a way, or artisans who just were feeling hopeless, nowhere to go. And you worked with those guys for 45 years and not just given them design, you've given them compassion, you've given them how to do their production, get loans, everything under the sun. And what do you feel about this? Did you have the dream I and everybody else had for you as being the leading designer? But now you're not just the leading designer, but you're the most compassionate person for 45 years. You know, if I think of people in the who made a contribution in the last 45 years, there were earlier people, Pupul Jaikar, I'm not underestimating anything they contributed, and a few others. But, you know, when I think of the last 50 years, it is you, and guess who else I think of? John Bissell, who put Indian handlooms on the map of the world. And I think the trajectory of Dastakar and Fab India was same time. And also John, I can never forget the support, moral and other support he gave all of us.
Yeah. But you know, Poonam, I absolutely agree with you. And John did so much for Daskar, you know, not least of all, brainstorming our ideas. He and Elsie Jain were the formative people whom we talked to and who helped shape the form of Daskar. And I always remember going to John with some, it was after the Sikh massacre in 1984, and taking a bundle of cushion covers and bedspreads which Sikh widows had made. And he said to me with utmost gentleness and compassion, but firmness, he said that these are really not marketable, you know, and I don't believe in selling things by pressing the compassion button, the sympathy button, but I will give you the money to train these women to make better things, and then I will put them in my shop when they are really worth selling. And that, I think, has been a lesson for me in Daskar. And, you know, I just want to go back a little bit and say that between the Kutch episode, my 6 months in Kutch, and Daskar, there was, of course, the Khazana experience, because I came back and I became the buyer merchandiser for Khazana. And there I learned this lesson, sometimes with a lot of sadness and bitterness, of how, you know, you can have wonderful people, you can have wonderful skills, but if they don't actually press that consumer button in terms of appeal and quality and finish and price, it's really not worth it. I mean, it's no point trying to have craftspeople imagine that their world is suddenly going to turn around. Everybody has to work very hard, including them, to get it right. And when I was in Khazana, there was this instance of what I call the basket story, which I'm going to try and quickly tell you, because
Yes.
it really was the culmination of why I then came to those meetings for Daskar, which resulted in Daskar. I was, as I said, the buyer designer for Khazana, and it was a beautiful shop, quite new at the time because there were no fancy lifestyle stores. And this was the first time there was a single store on 2 floors, beautifully displayed and lit. And I had a more or less open hand and an open ticket to go anywhere in India and pick up whatever I liked and which I thought would sell. And one idea we had was to do the upstairs part into a kind of home, which again, I mean, this was now, as I said, 45 years ago, it was quite an original concept. So we had different sections, living room, bedroom, children's room, etc. And I wanted to have plants. And indoor plants was not something, not the cliche it is today. So we had, the Taj had a wonderful nursery, and so that plants was not a problem, but what were you going to put them in? And I had seen these lovely baskets in the Assam Emporium on Baba Kharak Singh Marg, and I thought that these would be great. So I went off to Assam Emporium in a basement. They had these full of baskets. So I took 3 sizes and I took a whole lot back, and I got some plants and we put it in. And actually it was just more for the decor. But then people started wanting to buy them. And they said, oh, can we buy this plant? And we want the basket also. And this thing really began galloping, and these baskets started walking out of the Khazana. And I went and placed a standing order with the Assam Emporium for so many baskets every week. And they were very happy because they said they'd been lying in their basement for, years. Then one day, Mr. Kerkar, who was the chairman of Indian Hotels, came visiting and from Bombay. And he called me and he said, the shop is looking lovely, it's doing so well, blah, blah. But this basket nonsense has to stop. So I said, why, Mr. Kerkar, they're doing so well, He said, my dear girl, yes, and it was a wonderful thing, and it brought people into the shop and everyone's talking about it. But do you know the kind of the cubic inches that those baskets occupy, and the value of 1 cubic inch of real estate in the Taj Hotel? And just think about it. Plus, you need a messenger to carry these baskets out to people's cars, bring them in, etc., etc. It's just not viable as a long-term thing. Think of, you could put jewelry in that space, you could put leather luggage in that space. So the baskets have to stop. So I was really upset, and I said I must personally go to the Assam Emporium manager and tell him, because he was going to be so upset. So I went off. I used to drive a little motorcycle in those days, and I went off there. And before I could say anything, the Assam manager was looking rather flustered. And he said, oh, ma'am, I'm so glad you've come. I've just got this letter from my head office that we can't supply you any more baskets. So I said, why? So he said, well, he says that, it's too much of a expense to go to the villages, collect the baskets, put them on trucks, send them to Delhi. It's just not cost effective. And we don't have the manpower and we don't have the time. And I went home and I thought about it, and I said, it's so strange that there are craftspeople in Assam who can make these baskets, need to sell them. There are consumers in Delhi who love the baskets and want to buy them. But because there are these 2 rigid organizations in the middle, just thinking about their bottom line, it's not going to happen. And that's really, I think, that brought home to me how much we needed an interventionary agency, which was not necessarily only profit-led, which could act as a bridge between urban consumers and rural craftspeople. I know that all of us who came to those meetings at Bunny's had a different motivation, and feeling that something like Daska is important. But I think for me, it was those baskets.
You know, Laila, you could write, I hope, will write a book which will include, I'm sure, I know that basket is not the only story. There are so many stories, and there are so many coincidence and stories in your life that have created coincidence for crafts and how they have flourished in spite of. I would like you to respond to a statement I'm going to make, in spite of the fact that since independence, except for the, as I said, contribution, and I'm glad you introduced my guru, Lakshmi Jain. John Bissell was my best friend and inspiration, but Lakshmi Jain was my guru. And you introduced him, and he introduced cottage industry. So there have been institutions that have contributed to India. But if I see the last 4 decades, you know, apart from the fact that I welcome the fact that designers have continued to use crafts, many designers, and, you know, and the fact today that in Mijwa, you know, rural women who used to do little bit of embroidery, you know, make a handkerchief or a scarf, are today supplying and have clothes designed by Manish Malhotra. So the designers, I will say some of them have kept the craft tradition, but how many people have benefited in terms of numbers, we don't know. But we are very proud of the embroideries and other work done. We have not invested in infrastructure for artisans. If I look at China, which has only maybe 10, 12 skills, look, the amount of investments they've made. So all over the world, you see Chinese crafts, and India has hundreds of skills, and yet we don't see much crafts outside. So whether it's export, infrastructure, finances, you know, I have not seen a budget that talks, one budget talked about artisans. And the numbers you'll share with us, the latest numbers, we are talking about millions. And, you know, when I was listening to the budget this year, I was thinking of a conversation with you and your concern in many Dastakar board meetings that this GST has further added to not only the payments they have to make, and such high GST for artisans, but they have to hire chartered accountants to help them and so on. So I said, they are so proud of the GST that they are making, that they're collecting. And, you know, I thought of artisans and at what cost to them. And in fact, in one of my articles, I suggested that 2% cess should be on the wealth that has been created. And it is the artisan sector which has reached or gone back, even those who had crossed the poverty line. Why is it that India doesn't care about this large number of artisans? And when I say India doesn't care, with the exception of a few.
Yeah.
Your comments.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. And I do want to say at this point, since we're taking the long view of 75 years,
yes,
I think that apart from the first 20 years where India was still fueled in a way by Gandhiji and his passion for rural India and the skills of rural India, it has been very much the same. I don't think that previous governments have a very golden record either. And in fact, I think the contribution you know, to the sector in the first 5-year plan was 3%. And now I think it's like 0.000 something, you know, tails off. And in fact, I refuse to write or speak this time about the budget because every year I say exactly the same things, that I pore over the budget looking for artisan sector and I don't find it. No, it's a very curious thing because it's incredibly short-sighted, because actually the Indian craft sector, and in that I include both handlooms and textiles as well as three-dimensional crafts, is actually the one unique strength that India has that no one else in the world has.
Yes.
And it's a gold mine. And we are talking about rural migration. We are talking about, cities become saturated. We are talking about trying to find livelihood alternatives for people. There's unemployment. And here you are, you have existing skills. You have millions of people who have those skills and don't have to be trained in them. It requires very little infrastructure to set up a craft activity. It also can provide all kinds of ancillary employment in the sense of if you have dry cleaning units, you have wood turning units, you have dyeing and washing, all these things can provide further employment. You're not just talking about the existing craftspeople. And yet we don't seem to see it or do it. There's nothing, there's no long-term investment or planning about the sector. If there's anything, it's a short-term sort of drip of some little scheme, very short-term, with a span of 6 months or 1 year. You have subsidies, which I think are the most dreadful things, calculated to make people look down on crafts and craftspeople. And, it's a real anomaly, and you can talk till you're blue in the face, talking about even the Daskar experience, that really, whether it's a project like Seva Lucknow or Daskar Ranthambore or Urmul or any of these, that the initial investment was really a couple of thousand rupees. And that's all it took to create something which has continued to grow and grow and grow and is totally sustainable.
So Laila, stay with that. I don't want you to go blue, talking about all the problems.
Yeah.
I want to
talk about the positives. Yeah.
No, not positives. I want people to hear from you. And there's the audience of this lecture, I understand, is a lot of young people, and this is going to stay online, and people, what are the ideas you have? And what are give your wish list ideas to people, how we can take forward or our unfulfilled wishes, dreams for the artisans, how can they get fulfilled? So, and what kind, Rajiv Gandhi Foundation has a director now in Vijay Mahajan, who is the ustad of rural livelihoods, credit, and so on. Let's leave behind a few challenges for not only Rajiv Gandhi Foundation, but those of there are people on the, I can see Amarnath, I can see so many people who build institutions. We have Bim Bissell with us. What is it that we can ask for? And what do you inspire others to do, especially young people who are thinking of making a contribution to India beyond 75 years?
Yeah, well, I think that the first thing is to realize that young people are aspirational. And I don't think that the mindset in India today is for people to do what maybe in previous generations, to give up their lives and go and work in rural India or to make those kind of economic sacrifices and things. There's a different mood, there's a different need. And I would say to them, and I do say every time I get an opportunity to talk to young people, that whether you are an aspiring fashion designer or you are part of an IIT or management institute or whatever, actually there is a wonderful and exciting career in which you can make a lot of money if you go and you find a crafts community and work with them. Because as I said earlier, it doesn't require a huge amount of investment. It doesn't require a big infrastructure. And if you just take the example, we did it through the NGO route. I think the day of NGOs is gone now. But if you look at what we invested in any one of the, say, 750 organizations, crafts groups that Daskar works with, the amount was so paltry. And if you look at their turnovers and their productivity today, it's huge. They are, I think, out of those 750, there were maybe 3 that didn't work out. But otherwise, I think all of them today, some smaller and some bigger, but they all are actually independent of external funding, whether it is from the government or whether it's from funding agencies or NGOs. So I think that that's an example that if Seva Lucknow started with 1 steel trunk and 10,000 rupees, and today has a turnover of crores, I mean, anyone can do that. It wasn't that we were particularly gifted or amazing or whatever. In fact, we fumbled our way through those early projects. But because the skill was there, and India is so extraordinarily lucky in still having a consumer market on so many levels with people who do like to wear and use and feel comfortable in craft, I think that it is quite easy to make a very good and successful life for yourself working in craft, and probably more so than struggling in this world today, particularly post-COVID world, which is so uncertain and where you really don't know whether the office or the factory you're working in is going to survive over the next year or so. So I would say go out, adopt a community, see their skill, match your own professional skills with it, and see what happens. And it's not just the Daskar experience or the Sasha experience or the SKK experience. So many young designers and entrepreneurs are doing that today. And I think that's the hope for India, that let's lose that reliance on government, because I think government has shown that it doesn't really understand this sector and doesn't feel for the sector or comprehend its needs. And let's see if we can do it ourselves.
Yeah, but we can't give up on the government, and we
No, there have to be some people who needle the government all the time. But I do think that, for people to come and say that, well, this is the job of the government. If the government isn't doing its job, we have to do it.
Yes, can't agree with you more. Just one, before we move away from crafts, I want to ask you what you thought, and Khadi Village Industries was something that could have contributed significantly, but to quote Elsie Jain, they nationalized very early on Khadi Village Industries, and that was the end of the potential it had. And do you think there are opportunities to revive that? And if yes, what would you suggest?
Well, I think that KVIC, first of all, has to stop thinking that they own Khadi. Khadi existed long before they did, and it belongs to all of us. And I think they're extraordinarily short-sighted and stupid in trying to prevent people from even using the word Khadi or selling Khadi and whatever, because they don't do it very successfully themselves. And partly their hands are tied by some very silly policies and things that prevent them from being professionally marketing the product, developing it. And so I think they should let other people get on with the job. But instead of that, they spend an enormous amount of time actually suing people who are working with Khadi. And it's absolutely frustrating. I was, some years ago, I think it's about 20 years or more ago, I was on one of these Khadi strategy, something or the other. And we used to go, we had quite a dynamic chairman, but I remember the first meeting and there were all these really wonderful, saintly old people who had worked with Gandhiji and worked with Kamala Devi and all, and who really loved Khadi and felt for it, but who were totally removed from what the marketplace is like today. And we had this very frustrating meetings where everything we said was struck down as being either commercial or not what Gandhiji would have liked. And I remember pulling out a quote from Gandhiji saying that, we have to be sensitive to the market, and that things have to sell, that khadi has to be sellable. And if it is creased and crumpled, no one is going to buy it and think, but it just made no difference. And these were the governing board or the trustees. And it was, and then the secretary to the thing saw, I think, my frustration and whatever. And in the lunch break, he drew me into a big hall. They had this wonderful office in Bombay, and there was this huge hall full of Godrej almaras and shelves and all that. And he opened them, in that packs and packs of files. And he said, "Madam, these are the papers of all the commissions and khadi boards and all that came before you. You are the 15th, I think." So, we know that, I think, many ideas and many dreams disappeared in all that cloud of files and dust, because I think we have to just get on with it. The world is a very different place from what it was in pre-independence India. And if khadi is going to move with us, it has to change as much as we have.
Absolutely.
It's the most beautiful fabric, but it needs a lot of both technological inputs as well as professional marketing and promotion. And I think that it's very exciting to see that there seems to be a revival of interest in khadi and handloom. And but we must allow people to work in the sector and not tie them up in red tape. And as I said, it just makes my blood boil when I hear that we are not allowed to use this word.
We're neither going to let you go blue, nor we're going to let your blood boil. I'm going to move us to, the contribution that your family has made to India as co-founders of they were involved with the founding of the Indian National Congress. We know that the Bombay Presidency Association in 1885, a body which championed Indian interests and hosted the first meeting, was hosted by, for the Indian National Congress, was hosted by your great-grandfather. And then, of course, you had, I don't know about your grandfather, but I had the privilege of meeting one of the strongest men I have met, whose presence was not only a pleasure, but mind-blowing, and who had the, if I may use the word, audacity to title his book, Memoirs of an Egoist. I still haven't recovered from that. Coming from a strong family of men who have contributed so significantly, and not to forget your mother's contribution, your absolutely beautiful mother's contribution to the Indian flag, which I hope you'll talk about. How did that, and a family of great values. So how did that shape your life and what you have done and how you live your life? We want more about Laila Tyabji now, and not just crafts. We do know a little bit, and we'll wait for your book. But please.
But yes, I think that it was, there were two things going on, I think, growing in a family like that. One was extraordinary freedom, which I took so much for granted. But even now, age 75, young Indian women sort of can't believe that I had that freedom 60 years ago to live on my own, to choose my own directions, to have all that. So there was that enormous freedom. There was great intellectual stimulus, because my father liked nothing better than raising a controversial subject at the breakfast table and then making us argue both sides, where he would feel that we needed to learn how to support our causes. But when you have so much freedom, there's a lot of expectation also. And though it was never done in a pressurized way, I did feel that obviously, given all that freedom, my parents did expect me to do something interesting. And it took me a long time, actually. I think it was really only when I was in my late 20s, early 30s, that I discovered exactly what I wanted to do. And that, of course, was this whole Kutch and craft and design, because I did all kinds of things. I like to write, I like to paint and draw, I like to sort of
embroider.
Yes, I liked the whole thing of people and interacting with them. And I think I'm glad now that I did all those kind of things, including researching for films. I used to do copy editing for, my brother worked in a publishing firm, so he used to, bring back, and these were all ways of me earning my living, so I didn't have to ask my parents. But yes, there was a thing within the extended family that, Laila's quite intelligent and talented, but when is she going to settle down and do something properly, And it took time. But the other thing which people find very extraordinary is that there never was any pressure on me to get married. And I think my parents were very relaxed about that. Though my mother did say, again, perhaps rather unconventionally, considering that it was in the sort of 1970s, that, yeah, I can see that you find it difficult to find a man who'd suit you long term, but why don't you just have a baby? And I don't think there are very many mothers in that decade who would say that, but she really meant it, and I could have, but I funked it because I always felt that, okay, you don't get on with the husband, you can get rid of him, but you can't really throw the baby out of the window. So, yeah, and I was nervous that I would find it really difficult. And I always used to say that supposing the baby has no sense of humor, or it would be very difficult for me to live with that child. But no, it was an extraordinary growing up. And then there was the outside world at the time also, because, as I said, I was born 1947. And when I was born, in fact, the partition riots were going on in Delhi later that year, and our house was attacked. And I was actually handed as a little baby, and this is appropriate for the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation because it was Mr. B.K. Nehru and his wonderful wife, Fori Nehru, who took me as a little baby because my mother said she wanted to stay with my father. And, so there was wonderful friendships and generosity and hospitality. But there was also a very strange feeling because my parents, like many Indian Muslims, and perhaps people don't realize how many they were, who took a very conscious decision to stay on in India and not go over to Pakistan. My father was offered the foreign ministership of Pakistan, but he didn't think of it for 1 minute. But there were lots of people around at that time, even some of his close friends, who couldn't understand this and said that, well, Pakistan has been created for Muslims like you, and you should go, and it was something that not just for my parents, but for my extended family of Tyabjis and Latifs and Fateh Alis and Haidris, that none of them thought for a minute of going to Pakistan, though no one knew at that time that it was going to be such a hostile partition and such a one which goes on even 75 years later, of two countries so separate. And we felt a great sense of pride and of involvement in this new country and the excitement of making it. My father was working in the foreign ministry with Panditji. He and my mother were the first, hoisted the first Indian flag in Belgium when he went there as an ambassador to start the Indian mission. And we ourselves, even as very small children, we sort of felt that we were also ambassadors for this new, exciting India. And we felt great pride and great involvement in it. And it's a feeling, I think, that perhaps grew as one lived abroad in the various countries where my father was posted, because we felt we were representing India. And frankly, India looked so wonderful, and it was so exciting to hear about these new things that were happening, these new universities, these new dams, hospitals. Every time we came back to India, we saw it coming up. And we felt very much part of it and a belonging, in a way that perhaps today so many regional and religious and divisions have come. People don't perhaps identify so much with this single identity of India, in which all these different strands are. It's very sad. I feel very sad today when I hear somebody say, "Oh, you celebrate Diwali," and on the other side have so little knowledge about what the festivals and customs of other religions are. Because for me, they are all part of the tapestry of this India, which makes it so unique and special. And that's why I love working in crafts. I know you wanted to move away from crafts, but for me, crafts is actually a palimpsest of that united India, where people of so many different races and regions and cultures and things come together and they work. And for me, actually, Daskar is a microcosm of that India, which I so love and believe in.
I think this is such a rich conversation. We really went through the whole history of this country in a way during this conversation. We touched upon so many aspects.
There's one question I want to ask.
Yes, Aman, please come in.
Yes. No, it's absolutely delightful to listen to this conversation. It is the journey of India. And I'm just a little younger than you, but we've had this parallel journey. I think that we were very privileged because we had no arrogance, and we were learning all along, and as we continue to do. So we were very, very different from people you meet today. People who arrive today having done a minuscule diploma, something in design, and they think they know the whole universe. And we, at every stage, including today, believe, at least I do, and I know Laila does, we think that we don't know enough, because there's so much to learn, whether it's crafts, whether it's architecture, restoration. So we were Renaissance people, that we did a whole lot of things. We moved from one to the other in a sort of Tagore way, maybe with much less eminence, but we had no complexes, because there was our parents, our teachers, and India were not telling us, don't do it, And that, I think, is something we should continue to tell the future generations, and not cut their hands. It's not done like this, it's not done like that, because we learned with our mistakes, I mean, I find it hilarious that, I am called to architecture colleges to talk. I've spoken at 50, and I just did a talk in Jaipur to 400 architects. So I started by saying I'm not an architect, but that's the beauty, that it's because you know less, that therefore you work harder. Like that Avis company, they said we're number 2, so we try harder. If you're number 1 and arrogant, then the decline begins. So kudos to you, Laila, for all that you've done, and the humility with which you still shoulder all that you've done.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
And Aman, I want
and thank you, Aman, for giving me a few opportunities over the years to do exciting things.
And Aman, I'm glad no one told you not to do the amazing books that you did on crafts, a series. And by the way, the first time I published anything in my life was a chapter in the map, one
In
of
that
the,
Rajasthan book, yeah.
yes, the leather one. So
Yeah.
there is Pratibha Gautam.
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Yeah, I would like to ask you one question. What are the changes that art and craft industry is facing right now, especially through pandemic?
Oh, well,
Laila, don't go blue.
no, I won't go blue. I'm not going to actually go through it all because I think the pandemic is one occasion where, yes, of course, craftspeople have suffered a lot, and but so have millions of other Indians. And I don't think any of us will ever forget those migrant workers streaming back to their villages, unemployed and things. And I always say that it was the sight of those people going back to their villages without jobs, without pensions, without any um, future to look forward to, that made a lot of young craftspeople today in rural India think that maybe their lot was not so bad, that to have a built-in skill and a tradition, a family business might not be aspirational, might not be very well paid, but at least it was something that you can fall back on. And over again, I don't want to sound too optimistic and, thing about it, rosy-eyed about it, but it is true that whether it's a Kutch earthquake or whether it's insurgency in Kashmir or whether it's GST or Notebandi, the crafts community has been able to bounce back quicker than a lot of other industries because they have this inherent skill tradition. And as long as Indians continue to buy their products, appreciate their products, realize their value, I think that things are not as grim as they could be. They're pretty grim, but they're not absolutely irreparable.
That's a great, positive and note to build on when we are talking about skilling in India. Here are these people who do have the skills. We are not able to skill people. And I think we need to work on that. I'm going to go to Pankaj.
My name is Pankaj, and I'm an archivist working with the Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. I'm looking after the archives sections of Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. I have a question about the importance of supporting art and craft in current scenario. I mean, current economy, and how we support these artisans.
Well, Pankaj, we have to support artisans in the way that we would support any other sector of our economy. Let's not put craftspeople into a separate little box and think that there's something, which is different or which is primitive or the past, or they need any economic activity needs investment. It needs R&D, it needs infrastructure, it needs skilling, it needs improved technologies, it needs networking and marketing, and it needs promotion and publicity. And I think we have to stop thinking of craftspeople as something quite distinct and of the past, because until that attitude changes, nothing is going to change.
Do you think anything changes when, if you see, you're talking about 45 years of your experience? Do you see some changes in these periods?
Yeah, I do. This is a question that I'm asked and I ask myself. I think it depends a little bit which side of my bed I get up in the morning. But basically, I think the answer is that in a micro sense, I've seen a lot of change. As I said, I've been fortunate enough to work with families of craftspeople over these 45 years. And I've seen the huge changes, not just in themselves, but in their villages, in their houses, in the family dynamics, where the women have much more say because they're also bringing in incomes. But in a macro sense, if I put those, I think Daskar works with about 1.5 lakh families of craftspeople in India. If I put that against the millions of craftspeople in India, I can say that nothing very much has changed. But I would say that the Daskar experience and the experience of many other people who worked with craft over these last few decades shows that it can be done. You can, in quite a short span of time and with quite minimal investment, turn around the economics of a family and the social dynamics of that community. And I think it's a very exciting thing to do. It's great fun. And I recommend it highly to everybody.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And may I also add, Laila ji, that it's also because of the contributions of so many people like you. I've also, in my modest exposure, have been lucky enough to work with people who have taken us to these, craft people, and it has really changed the way we look at, this country and art and craft, and that is really wonderful. Like, I think if the youth keeps getting inspired like this, and we kind of create this relay chain reaction, then we do have a lot of hope. And I think
Absolutely,
what's
but I
better
do
than hope
want
in
to,
this world?
I want to sort of just inject, I won't say cold water, but a touch of rational sort of thing in it. That I think the problem today is not just that the craft sector needs sort of economic investment, but we have to change our mindsets. And this goes not just for the government, but all of us. That there are many, many craftspeople in India today who are actually making quite a good living. But even then, they don't want their children to continue in the sector. And that's unfortunately because of the way the sort of the social practices which make educated urban Indians think that somehow a craftsperson who works with his hands or her hands is inferior to them. And an instance I'll give is that, for instance, it's to lay the warp of a ikat patola sari is really as complex as any kind of software programming. But if you ask an average middle-class Indian mother whether she would like her daughter to marry a computer programmer or to marry a master craftsperson, I think we all know what the answer would be. So until we change that and we learn to recognize that craftspeople are skilled professionals and they actually know things and have skills that most of us don't have and that we should value and respect, I think, that is the big, big hurdle today in seeing that Indian crafts survive.
I am the exhibition designer at RGF.
okay.
And so yes, all the exhibitions that we do here. So it's I'm very lucky to get the opportunity to design exhibitions on very varied topics over here. So it's been a great experience. And Laila ma'am, I think listening to you has always been a privilege. So ma'am, what I wanted to ask you is that, organizations like Dastkar and individuals like us or other organizations, what can we do, in the arts and crafts, or what do you already do to support people with disability also? I know you help a lot of people with, not with the poor economic background, but what about people with disability?
I'm afraid, Vasunda, I have to confess that Daskar has to be very hard-hearted about that because our mandate is to work with traditional craftspeople who already have a traditional skill and to help them come back into the mainstream market. And we really don't have the bandwidth and human resources to work with disabilities. We don't have those kind of skills ourselves. And so I know there's wonderful work being done by lots and lots of organizations who work with people with disabilities. We are always happy to help them market the products if they want to come and be part of a bazaar or something, but we don't ourselves do projects with them.
Okay. All right. No, I was just taking from that idea of, remember when you just told us that, you took the certain products and Mr. Bissell said they're not good enough to be kept, but then he was happy enough to provide a training for them.
But they were not people with disability. They were women who had tailoring, stitches and embroidery, some background. And also because it was a very particular moment in time of great crisis. So we felt we had to do something about it.
Okay.
It's like giving the example that you repeated from Laila's conversation about John Bissell and Fab India is give somebody a fishing rod than just a fish.
Yeah.
So Yamini.
Good evening, ma'am. First of all, thank you so much for, I personally would like to thank you for the historical route that you took in this conversation. I think it was like listening to a very nice story, and the entire narrative of the basket, I think, was something I particularly enjoyed. So I would just like to quickly ask the question that I think today the term that you hear the most, especially in spaces of art, in galleries, in it's even entered, I guess, performing arts, Indian performing arts as well, is the term contemporary arts. And I feel like somewhere in this world of contemporary arts, our traditional handicrafts and textiles they're not considered contemporary. I don't know, it's almost like, the cool kids in school versus not so cool kids. How does it, but I don't see there being like a stop date on Indian handicraft.
No, and I'm delighted you asked that question, because it's something that is really irritating, that craft has never been static. It has always responded to society and to the consumer. And there's no one point that you can say, any craft you like, whether it's a handloom or whether it's a craft like bidri or jewelry, that you can say that, yes, it reached its culmination in 1820, and that's it. It's frozen in time. It has always changed. And I can tell you that, for instance, in Kutch, where I've done a lot of work, embroidery women, whether they are Jat or whether they are Rabari or whether they're Mochi embroiderers, can pick up a piece of embroidery and tell you within 10 years of when it was made, just as the way that the craftsperson has the colors that they've used, the composition, the way that they have depicted the peacock or the flower, it changes and it responds to influences around them. So I think it's very silly to say that, oh, craft is this and it is, it belongs to such and such decade and now it's not contemporary. But this idea that craft should always look the same is not just in the minds of urban consumers, but it is also, unfortunately, in craftspeople themselves. They feel very hesitant about changing because customers come and they want something which looks, in inverted commas, traditional. And they get very agitated if it looks different. I mean, one example is miniature painting. I mean, why on earth should miniature painters go on and on painting Shah Jahan and Noor Jahan and Mumtaz Mahal and the Mughal court? Because then they become just copyists. Why aren't they painting scenes of contemporary India? Why aren't they doing a traffic jam in Connaught Place instead of the Mughal court? But the consumer is expecting that, and they don't realize that what is the essence of craft. It is the technique, it is the motive traditions, it is the colors, and you can do that and use those same, that same USP to create very contemporary pieces. And that's frankly what I'm very passionate about and I love to do. And I try to encourage young designers today to work on all these traditional skills and give them that contemporary twist, but keeping the signature of the craft.
Thank you, Yamini, asking that question. Urjita Sharma, we will end. Our last question is from Urjita Sharma.
Thank you so much, Poonam ma'am. Good evening, Laila ji as well. And I've been so engaged with this conversation of both of yours and how you personalized all of your stories, coming from a designer's background, having been trained as a designer and been into the craft sector for the last 5, 6 years now, and working with the craft clusters as well. The thing that you said very beautifully stood out to me a lot, that when you work with craft clusters, you just don't design a particular product. After a point of time, you have to get involved and do something about their lives as well. So that really stood out to me. And this also brought to me a question that I have, thought of times and again after working with different clusters, that say when you work with a particular community, there's a very thin line that after which that of a time period of continuous work, the hope of you giving help for the community turns into expectations, and that turns into dependency, or say even lethargy from the side of community. So have you, of course, in your experience, how have you dealt with situations like that with the community?
Well, I think that that's where the fact, I mean, to be very pragmatic, I think that's why it's been very fortunate that Daskar has been a very small and very poor organization all its life, because I think we are not very good at fundraising. So when we work on a project, right from the beginning, we have to make it very clear to the crafts community that they have to contribute too, not in terms of money, but in terms of their time, their motivation, and their actual work. That we may help them with designs, we may help them with the raw material for sampling, etc. But they have to also contribute. And we say that it's exactly like sending your child to a school where you have to provide them maybe with their books and their uniform and their pencils and whatever. And in return, hopefully they will get an education which will eventually bring in some income. So I think that sometimes there are organizations and NGOs or government departments who have a lot of money to spend, and they have a scheme and they have all those funds, and they go and pour it onto the community. And the community thinks that it's going to be like that forever. But here we have to be very tough, and we say that, okay, if you spoil a piece, you're not going to get paid for it. And you have to be responsible. You can't use a skein of embroidery and then pocket a couple, to take home with you. And you have to be equally involved and participative partners in this whole process.
Great. That's
Thank
a
you so
great
much.
note for us
Wonderful.
to end
Yeah.
on. Wonderful. Laila, it is very, very clear what you've said to people: buy crafts. That's one way to support artisans. And I think that encouraging Urjita is doing exactly what you suggested, working in clusters. And I am so glad we are ending with a question and comment from you, Urjita. And I hope there'll be many more Urjitas who will follow Laila's trajectory and contribute to India's economy, heritage, numbers. We don't have to look for made in India. We don't have to look for skilling. Here are people with skills. And clearly there is we are very late. I'm just going to say Laila's iconic contribution in her life to so many facets is drawing the balance for the artisans, where there is compassion, there is commitment, but there is a professionalism, Laila, that you believe in and you have brought. And the one experience I've had with you from the day I met you is that you have never lost that balance. You have never lost, and worked with you, I have never seen you lose that balance. You've had the clarity and CP, compassion, along with professionalism and passion. So it's so sad we have to end there. But Laila, I hope this is not the only time we are going to have a conversation.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Poonam. Thank you, Rajiv Gandhi Foundation. And thank you, all you seen and unseen faces who took the time out to listen to us.